Okay, I think we can start. Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Today we are resuming the cycle of online peer learning sessions under the Skills Lab network. These sessions a bit different than webinars, which are aiming at sharing a specific case from projects or organizations which are relevant to the work of our network. Today we have the opportunity to hear and have with us Professor Anton Emmerich, professor at the European University Institute in Florence, who will tell us about the WellSIRe project. Just before entering the topic, I would like to share just a couple of updates on our Skills Lab network. From the launch in 2021, we are now around a bit less than 900 members from ETF partner countries, from EU member states, and also beyond. So we are really taking shape as a global forum to discuss skills issues. Regarding this year, in 2026, we have already had a number of interesting activities, starting with a live event in March on from skills anticipations to policy action, with the support of the European University Institute in Florence. We already organized 4 webinars on artificial intelligence into technical vocational education and training, on the topic of using skills anticipation evidence in policy making, on visibility and the value of skills in algorithmically managed work, focusing on the Southeastern Europe, and very recently a webinar on the attractiveness of vocational education training in the Southern and Eastern Mediterranean region. We still have ahead of us a number of activities, including today's peer learning and other webinars where we are planning to focus on the use of artificial intelligence in the area of micro-credentials, one on skills for social inclusion, and 2 more webinars focusing on the remaining regions, meaning the Eastern neighborhood and Central Asia. And also 1 more online peer learning around November that we will share information very soon about all. Also, a few words about the sub-communities. You know that we have created within the network 1 sub-thematic communities, one on the skills dimension of migration, which is progressing very well. 2 publications have recently been released out of a call for papers that we launched last year. And we are going to soon launch another one with a focus on tracking of graduates as a tool for skills anticipation. Okay, just a few words about the network, so we can now enter into the topic for today. We have with us Professor Emmerich, who will tell us about the WellSIRe project that he is coordinating. The project is called Wellbeing Returns on Social Investment Recalibration, and it's a research project looking at the welfare states and how countries can invest in social programs to help people live better lives and make the economy stronger. So instead of looking at government spending as just a cost, the project views it as an investment. We will hear from Professor Emmerich about stocks, flows, and buffers. And after the presentation, we will have a dedicated session, a discussion session, where you can address questions to Professor Emmerich with a facilitation of our dear Begenke, who is with us and will help us to moderate the session. As usual, the materials from this session will be made available in the open space. We will share the link afterwards so that you can see there the presentations. And I'm pleased to introduce our speaker now, Professor Anton Emmerich, who is Professor of Political Science and Sociology at the Department of Political and Social Sciences at the European University Institute in Florence. He has an economist background, has been Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at the Free University in Amsterdam. He has also directed the Scientific Council for Government Policy, the main think tank in the Netherlands, and held several visiting appointments from the MIT to the University of Lisbon, the University of Antwerp, the Collegio Carlo Alberto in Turin University, and was a Centennial Professor at the London Schools of Economics and Political Science. Anton has also frequently served as an advisor on social policy, social investment, and the welfare state for the European Commission, and is the author of several publications focusing on welfare states and social investment. Professor Emmerich, thank you for accepting to be with us today. I'm now glad to give you the floor. Over to you.
Thanks so much for your kind words. Yes, we've been doing this big ERC grant for the past five, almost 6 years. And what I want to share with you today, once we see the slides, is sort of, the results of this project and also sort of some reflection that I would like to share with you. It's called Returns to Social Investment. Here you see a picture of a book that just came out with Oxford University Press. That's the fourth layer of the project. I tell you a little bit about these different layers that we have later on. But in the picture, now I can't see it anymore, but the picture shows a flourishing tree with very deep roots. And I think that's a very good image of what I would like to talk about, because the roots of the welfare states are deep, and they have to be deep. They search for water, and they create oxygen once the flowers bloom. So anyway, yesterday we here at EUI we presented the book that you just saw, and later we'll see again. And there was a very lively discussion here at EUI. So what I'll be talking about is something on the academic literature on social investment here in the European context. Then I reflect a little bit on lessons from the Great Recession and today's sort of geopolitics fragmentation, and also the AI, disruptive revolution. Then I will try to sort of, summarize the big project that we've been working on for 5 years in 2 minutes, which is of course very difficult. And then I go to the logic of social investment and the way we've looked at a number of data and tried to combine different data using different methodologies to reach sort of like synergetic insights on this. And then, in the last part, I'd like to reflect a little bit on the methodological implications of what we've done. I mean, how to move forward in a way. Next slide, please. So I think the dominant perspective in the literature today is to think about social investment as something opposed to social protection, or what is also sometimes called social consumption, in the sense that you have social security that costs money, that is given to people who are unemployed or who live in poverty. And if you start to invest in people, there's a tendency to invest in those that are well off, and that in a way, takes, resources away from those who really need it. So that's a bit of a zero-sum view on social protection on the one hand, and social investment, activation, early childhood education and care, active labor market policies, and what have you. And this is a rather dominant view in the literature. I mean, it's a nice view because analytically it's very easy to distinguish and also to measure. And it has a sense of, the causality running, basically one way. There's a zero-sum game. You either invest in people, but then you invest in the middle classes, and that means that you take away money from somewhere else. And that it makes it sort of, easy to operationalize. And then you can also generalize from, certain findings. Now, I have a different view on this, but the bigger point here that this is actually more difficult to show, although I think we show it very strongly. Anyway, so here the idea is that social investment is by and large self-financing, because by raising the skills of people, there are more people that pay into the revenue basis of the welfare state, and that precisely that allows governments to be able to pay for pension benefits. So, if and especially in an aging societies, if you want to save pensions, you really need to invest in those who are at work and also in children. So that's, you can call it a mana mechanism, another Matthew effect that is very dominant in this other perspective. And the interesting finding that we conveyed in this book that came out more recently is that a lot of European countries, Italy, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, Finland, what have you, they have huge standing social protection commitments. So when you think politically, when there is a political campaign, you fight for, vote for me and you get more of this, vote for her and your pension is at risk and something like that, right? But the thing is, in these countries, given the fact that there are so many outstanding commitments to pensioners, to the unemployed, to the poor, but also to education, once you're elected into power, you become the governor of the welfare commons. And given that the welfare commons is very popular, this incentivizes governments to search for solutions to get, maybe more people in the labor market in order to pay for pensions. So there is even a crowding in logic politically in social investment policy, the way we see it. Now, the tricky bit, and this is sort of both theoretical but also very much methodological, is that the causality that we show is configurational in the sense that policies should match one another. So when you have good early childcare, good quality childcare, but you do not have generous leave policies, you have less women in the labor market and less children going to good quality childcare that has a knock-on effect in terms of human capital later on in life. So what we're looking at is something that is conditionally dependent, and this obviously is more difficult to operationalize. And the other thing is that given that configurations they do change over time, but they generate elective affinities and complementarities. It's very important to contextualize, per country or per city, the way these configurations evolve, and that makes it less easy to generalize. But I think that the configurational lesson is much more interesting for policymakers. Next slide, please. So if we go back before the Great Recession, because it was a major shock, I mean, in the old days, there was this, in the 1970s, there was this big trade-off between equity and efficiency in the literature. But, if you look at sort of the outcomes of, countries that spend a lot on unemployment transfers and social assistance, you actually see the following results: that those countries that are highly committed to welfare spending are mostly, not all, of course, pretty competitive, and that the goal of lowering poverty is also achieved in these more high-spending countries. So this was already a reality before the Great Recession. I come back to this for the years after the Great Recession and the COVID pandemic, but this is something to sort of this is the starting way to think about, well, is there a trade-off or is there not a trade-off, and how do these sort of, components fit together? Next slide. So one of the interesting things about the Great Recession is that, previous slide, please, was that we talk about the Great Recession, we do not talk about, the Second Great Depression. And the reason why we talk about the recession is that actually there were automatic stabilizers at work when the crisis hit. I mean, it was quite a similar shock as in the 1920s, a big financial crisis. But these automatic stabilizers, unemployment benefit, and also pensions, they did not have to be invented. So they buffered the economy, not only at the macro level, but also at the micro level of individual households, exactly the way Keynes and Beveridge have had anticipated. Now, of course, in the European context, this was, lo and behold, also supported by whatever it takes non-conventional monetary policy. So that plays an important role, the Draghi, whatever it takes intervention. But then, moving on, we have COVID, and what was really imperative is to buy time to develop vaccines. And for this, you needed lockdowns. And in order to legitimate lockdowns, you needed to strengthen social protection, which is what many countries did, also based on the success of short-time furlough schemes that were very popular in the wake of the Great Recession. And this was, lo and behold, also supported fiscally by the European Commission. Now, throughout both of these crises, twice, it was the more capacitation-oriented welfare state, or I would call them social investment welfare state, that sort of, saw a relatively swift recovery of employment rates. And I think this is an important insight to think about. Next slide. But then, today we're living all of a sudden in a different age altogether. So as I said, many good things happened at the EU level. It took a long time, after the Greek crisis. You probably know all this. But the architecture of EMU has been redesigned, but not fully. And clearly, the EU was taken off guard by the weaponization of trade, the re-election of Trump, and there is a big pressure to start spending on defense spending, and this. So you have this resurfacing doubts that maybe Europe is lagging in many ways as a consequence of having these cozy welfare states. So although the evidence has never been so strong that actually a robust and active welfare state does all the important things that you want an advanced economy to do in order to prosper, there is this fallback in this old rhetoric where people say, out there must be some kind of trade-off between equity and efficiency. And of course, there are other sort of known knowns that we face, such as adverse demography, territorial inequalities that haven't been addressed, and there's the AI revolution and climate change, of course. So all of a sudden there's doubt again in the room to discuss social policy, and this is very unfortunate, and hopefully we can address that empirically. Next slide, please. So WellSIRe in a nutshell. So what we do, we take social advantage as multidimensional. I mean, all the micro level analysis that sociologists do show that there are intimate connections between income, work, health, housing, well-being in many ways. So that is sort of like, and that implies that given that these inequalities cluster, It is also important to think about policies that are effective, not in sort of as isolated one-shot interventions, but as configurations that sort of, work together. And over the past 2 decades, I would say that it has become increasingly clear in the European context that social protection alone is not effective in a knowledge economy. So inclusive social protection is very good, but they have to be complemented with gender balanced capacitating services for which, organization, implementation, intermediation, what happens at the subnational level is as important as what is happening at the legislative level of the economy. And we opt for a dynamic analysis in the sense that we look at long-term trends. I mean, long-term, 20 years, let's say, between, the early 2000s and basically today, and also try to see how across countries policy configurations, policy mixes differ over time. And we have a relatively voluntaristic approach that we believe that policy, and i.e. politics, because it's politics that have to enact the policies, matters, and that social structure is not per se determining. And finally, with this emphasis on capacitation, normatively, we are much closer to the capability approach of Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum than the political philosophy of John Rawls. But this is basically an aside. Next slide, please. So the way we designed the project is to say, okay, so if social investment works, you should be able to see that at the macroeconomic level. So there should be macroeconomic dividends by helping more people in job, having a bigger revenue base that then allows for sustaining relatively good levels of social protection. But then, this is correlation, right? So it's not causation. And we try to get to causation, although I don't like the word causation too much in the context of the social sciences. I rather think about cumulative causal adequacy. So we have hypotheses that can be tested, and if they're being confirmed, there's probably some truth in that. This is true at the macro level. And then you have to go to the micro level in order to show that, these macro level dividends actually translate into micro-sociological, sort of also quantitative material well-being progress of particular risk groups, be they single mothers or the long-term unemployed, in terms of whether they get good social protection or that they get, the childcare support and other types of support. So you go from the macro to the micro to kind of corroborate the bigger idea. And we do this not only at the material level of employment and poverty for particular risk groups. We also, to the extent that we have data for that, and we do, but they're not that great, but they are there, to kind of find out, whether this also translates into subjective well-being, so that people feel happier or less stressed if they are being supported by social investment policies. So this is all, the first three layers are all quantitative, macro and then twice micro. And then the political analysis, given the fact that these are policies that have to be put forward by political actors and by coalitions. So for this, we trace basically reform sequences across countries. We have 10 European countries in our project since 2000. So to kind of sort of be able to show that some of these policy changes or some of these good results at the macro and micro level, can be associated in terms of cumulative causal adequacy to political reforms. And finally, given the fact that the social investment-oriented welfare state, I come back to that, is very much a service intensive welfare state, the way services are implemented at the subnational level is extremely important. So we do not only look at legislative processes across countries, sort of at the national level, but we also look at how these policies are then being implemented in places like Stockholm, Amsterdam, Dublin, Milan, Warsaw, Prague, and more. And here we explore kind of, this social investment experimentation, and this is also why this book, which will come out next year, is being called Laboratories of Social Investment. And we're now finishing up this. So this is more or less the project that we have been doing in a nutshell. Next slide, please. So let me try to explain what is really the logic of social investment. And going back to this kind of trade-off between equity and efficiency, if you listen to these debates, it's often about how many people are being supported by the welfare states, or how many people are unemployed or inactive on disability pensions, etc., etc. And it could be a lot, and it could be too much. It can never be too little, I would say. But anyway, and then there's a discussion on how much do they get. And if they get too much, you can make the argument that probably because the benefits are so good, then people may become lazy. So this is the kind of debate that you're having, that we have been having for 30 years on the welfare state. But what is much more important in a knowledge economy and an aging society is how many people participate in the labor market. I mean, how many hours do they work? Because that is sort of, the revenue base largely. I mean, the welfare state is paid by all kinds of taxes, but largely it's paid by workers. So the number of workers and the hours of work is extremely important. Now, and the other thing that is extremely important is what is their average productivity per worker. And the fact is that actually social policy not only delineates the consumption per welfare client, social policy has a huge impact on the number of people who are in work and their productivity. And this is basically the social investment idea. So in a way, what the social investment logic sort of, conveys is that we have to shift the discourse from the number of people who are being supported by the welfare state. And we know from unemployment figures is that, 80% of the unemployed go back to work, right? So these are always transient periods over the life course. But to move away from that debate, sort of to move from the nominator of the equation to the denominator, and then realizing that actually social policies that kind of intervene across the life course, like leave policies, like childcare policies, like long-term care policy, they all have an effect on the number of people in work. And equally so, active labor market policies and training policies have an important effect on the average productivity per worker. So the implication, and I'm not sure this is being done really well, is a shift from the redistributed numerator political conflict to productive denominator governance. I mean, that is basically the idea. Next slide, please. So then, how to define social investment, and it's always a struggle for social I mean, defining things is always difficult. But this is my sort of as good as it gets definition. So social investment policy improves ex ante individual life chances and capabilities of individuals and families by mitigating social risk associated with post-industrial economies and aging societies across the entire life course. And that is the spine of the social investment paradigm, from childcare, education, and training, all the way to pensions and long-term care. However, throughout, social investment does not replace ex post compensation, all the sort of the ideas of Keynes and Beveridge that have been introduced in the 1950s and 60s, but they sort of, they complement compensation with what we call stepping stone solidarity. So generating second chances over the life course, making risky life course transitions easier. I mean, that is really the essence. So basically, you socialize the life course, but only at critical shifts, having to do with the shift from school to work, losing a job, getting back into the labor market, making the transition from starting a family, getting back into the labor market, maybe not full time, and also the transition to pension policy. Next slide, please. So bringing all the literature together, and this was a huge effort of my team, we kind of came up with the following logic, and it's a multiplier logic. So basically, the idea is that if there is good investment in early childhood education and care, there is more equality of opportunity in the labor market. So probably you have higher levels of female participation in particular, but also, you start with education at a really young age. And if you start education at a young age, then when you enter school, if you're cognitively and socially stimulated, probably the educational investment that comes next are actually also much better because the base, the background is a much better one. And that should then lead, again, these are all hypotheses, to that in good education system, building a good childcare system, when we enter the labor market at different levels of skills, obviously, because we're not all the same, on average, our entry-level productivity should be higher than when you do not have early childhood education and care and not quality education. If this then is supported by work-life balance policies, then obviously there is more equality, gender equality in the labor market, which then also translates not just in employment, more equal sharing of employment, but also in higher salaries. And if that is then next supported by lifelong learning and active aging, then clearly and flexible retirement, then obviously people will retire later and contribute longer to the revenue base of the welfare state. So if everything is constant, also taxes and social contribution, at the end of the cycle, there is for governments, if they want to do so, actually more fiscal revenue to fight poverty reduction and inclusion. So this is basically the background idea. And what we are interested in is how these cumulative life course effects translate into micro level well-being opportunities for employment, whether this is particular groups are much better protected in terms of minimum income, and also the macro level effects in terms of productivity growth, fiscal sustainability, and what have you. So this is the bigger working hypothesis that works both at the macro and at the micro level. Next slide, please. So the way we define the social investment welfare state, and again, coming back to what I said earlier, there is this sort of idea that there may be a trade-off between social protection and social investment, and we actually say No, these things are complementary. So we take in social protection buffers into our description of the social investment welfare state. And for 21st century social policy, we think that there are three functions really crucial. One is human capital stock, the enhancement and maintenance of human capital stock throughout the life course. So at every stage of the life course, and this is essential in a knowledge economy. Then what is as important is flow, and this should not be understood in terms of labor market flexibility per se, but it's more about, it's very important to ease transitions over the life course in relationship to the labor market, because we know that these are gendered, because, women bear children, so they have to take leave of absence. It would be good if husbands also take leave of absence, because then the chances are that when women return to the labor market, or they return more in full time than in part time, is also greater. I mean, these are the kind of things that are really complementary. But it's really about the easing of these transitions. So making transitions from having a family, from school to work, from work to pensions, making them easier. And then at the last stage, and this is also a lesson of the Great Recession, I mean, what we saw is that the countries that had relatively inclusive buffers, so basically relatively generous, but that everybody was covered, they had the more robust macro level stabilization effect. So in Italy, which is a relatively pension biased welfare state, so is Greece. If you only buffer the old age, then the people who lose their jobs have huge difficulties of getting back into work. And also, and given the fact that if ultimately they have to pay for pension, this creates huge problems in the future. So these buffers, they should not be segmented, sort of targeting the insiders, but should be targeting outsiders as much and even more so. So basically, these are the functions that we look at. And we try to kind of divide the policy repertoires up into stock flows and buffers, look at it quantitatively, both at the macro and the micro, and then also over time, basically looking at, whatever happened to stock flows and buffers in, particular countries, and also in the background, how the EU has been supportive of these reform trajectories. I mean, I may say something later about this. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to do now, and I want to do this relatively quickly, but basically what I would like to, so again, I start from a number of these macro correlational observations in order to find out whether our working hypothesis kind of holds. So I will be looking at different age cohorts over time with different spending categories and their outcomes. And then, I would then need to tease out sort of what are the micro level correlates of these findings in terms of causal adequacy. So basically here again, I already showed this for before 2012, but basically social spending and GDP, they sort of, correlate positively, and social spending and competitiveness, they do as well. Now, of course, you can say this is a spurious correlation because, countries that are richer can more easily spend on social protection, which is obviously true. So this doesn't imply that social spending, contributes to competitiveness and economic growth. But yeah, we'll see in the next slides that this evidence is actually much stronger. Next slide, please. So what I did with OECD figures is to kind of sort of take together unemployment benefits, social assistance, pensions. These are compensating social protection policies, and to see if there is a relation between high levels of commitments, outstanding commitments in terms of social protection, how that sort of, squares with investment in early childhood education, active labor market policy, long-term care, all these activating programs that countries have as well. And of course, social protection is a much bigger share of government spending than capacitating social spending, because there the background is already taken care of in terms of income. But what is interesting is that this strongly correlates. So the bigger point is that it's often countries that spend a lot on social protection that actually also spend a lot on social investment, and there are obvious outliers, and I already mentioned one of them, which is Italy. So this is very important, that in a way, the more countries spend on social protection, the more pressure there is to think about activation over the life course with outliers. Next slide, please. This I already showed for before 2012, but if we look at competitiveness and at risk of poverty rates, you really see high scoring countries, and these are usual suspects: the Netherlands, Denmark, Finland, and Sweden, and also France. And they are pretty competitive. Next slide, please. Now, if we now sort of, take cohort by cohort, and we begin, let's say, with children, and we take childcare participation and female employment. I mean, here you see that, the more kids are being covered by childcare, the higher levels of female employment, and they contribute to the revenue base. Next slide, please. This correlation is not so strong, but it's still the arrow goes in the right direction, that with longer hours of childcare participation, child poverty goes down, and this is obviously an effect because more women work and they contribute to the family income. Next slide, please. So if we now, this is the young age, right? We now move to young adults in terms of their employment, and then looking at PISA scores, which is an indicator of educational attainment, and ask ourselves the question, are there more young people in work where PISA scores are higher? And again, the story is consistent with our sort of multiplier logic. Next slide, please. And then, there's a troubling indicator because it's rising. There's more in-work poverty. And so here we have a measure of an investment policy, is training participation, and whether this has an effect of in-work poverty. So the more countries are committed to training, the less in-work poverty there is. Next slide, please. And the same story holds for the long-term unemployed. So long-term unemployment is lower where more people participate in training. Next slide, please. And this is also true of the elderly population. I mean, the elderly population post 55, in many countries, access to training is very limited. But given the fact that, with the aging crisis coming along, probably we all have to work much longer. I mean, and here you see a very clear indication that as more people have access to training beyond the age of 50, their employment rates are much higher, and again, they contribute to the revenue base of the welfare state. Next slide, please. And the subsequent implication is obviously that poverty is lower in late adulthood, by the same token, more or less. Next slide, please. Which brings me to going back to this equation, right? I said we have to shift from the nominator to the denominator, and that is basically the carrying capacity of the welfare state. How many people are in work and what is their average productivity? And if you relate the carrying capacity to government debt, which is a big fiscal problem in Europe right now, again, you are able to convey that, those countries that have truly shifted their policy orientation from the nominator to the denominator, that they are in much better fiscal health facing the aging crisis. And I think this is an important insight. Next slide, please. And the funny thing is that we think about the welfare state as it's all about taxes, but taxes do not really correlate very strongly with the carrying capacity of the welfare state. So it's not a tax issue per se. I mean, for welfare policies, you need taxation, you need social contribution, but it's not, that you have per se, you have to have very high taxes in order to sustain a active welfare state. Next slide, please. So coming back to sort of the most important message is, what I've been talking about are policies, and these are social policies, but these are policies that contribute to higher levels of employment over the life course. And if you take a reverse Gini index, an inequality index, then you see that it's actually the countries that have relatively low inequality often have very high employment rates, and the size of the balloons that you see is public spending on both compensating social protection policy and social investment policy. So it's not about spending per se, but it's the kind of spending that countries mobilize for policies. Next slide, please. So this is basically the bigger macro story. So then we also looked at micro level data, and I won't run you through all the regressions, but we are able to show on the level of micro level data that we have here for the European Union that ALM policies are more effective when there's early childhood education and care. And work-life balance reconciliation is more effective when ALMP investments are adequate. And there is a knock-on effect of both of these policies, early childhood education and care and active labor market, where there are higher levels of educational attainment to begin with. So this is a complementary effect that pans out over time. And then when you look at poverty, it is very clear that social protection is very important for poverty alleviation, and that there is no trade-off between fighting poverty and raising employment through social investment. And this is a very strong finding that we can sort of present at the micro level. Next slide, please. And then we did something recently with a paper that will come out quite soon, where we looked at subjective well-being, and we use ESS data, and these are not so great. We correlate them with basically the service intensity of the welfare state, so whether they are more capacitating, yes or no. And we looked at long-term care and we looked at childcare. And we found three effects at the population level. One is a first order effect, that where there is early childhood education and care for young couples who have children, there's a much greater sense of life satisfaction and sense of control over their lives. And this also applies to long-term care for the elderly, because often it's women in the age group of, let's say, 50 who then leave their work in order to take care of their frail elderly if there is no long-term care. If there's long-term care, you know, you can sort of, there's professional care, and there is, quality time that you can spend with the fragile elderly. So on the target population, you really see an immediate effect on terms of life satisfaction and sense of control. Interestingly, we also find a weaker second order effect. So of those who are non-targeted, so young adults without children, but who may think that, if we want to have a child, or if you're an older person, maybe I need care at some point. If these things are sort of generally available, there's a signaling effect in terms of subjective well-being for these non-targeted groups. And there's a little bit much weaker, a wider population effect, that basically people are more sort of happy to live in a social investment oriented welfare state, coming to buffers. And this is a very important find, is that these first, second, and third order effects are in fact stronger when buffers are adequate, and we define buffers being adequate above the poverty line. So that's the insight of this micro story. Next slide, please. So the conclusion basically is that in today's knowledge economies and aging societies, social protection needs to be complemented with capacitating services, and that there are many positive sums, stock flow above synergies, that kind of pan out in a cumulative fashion across the life course. And in welfare economics, we often think of piggy bank solidarity, which is basically taxing the risk, and Robin Hood solidarity, which is, you save for your own pension. And these are extremely important, but these stepping stones across the life course, whether it's early childhood, active labor market policy, or long-term care, they are becoming much more important. And if you look at the spending on these policies, these are not big spending categories as healthcare is, or pension spending. And this kind of reinforces what I said before, that normatively we need to shift from a distributive understanding of social justice to a much more capability-oriented idea of social injustice. And then on subjective well-being, EU citizens, by and large, aspire to live in social investment-oriented welfare states. Next slide. So I have 3 more slides, I think, and this is about the methodological implication, as I promised before. Now, clearly, we see in the countries that we've been looking at, and this also applies to Greece and Italy, by the way, there's a shift from protective social security to enabling social investment without really undermining social protection. This is what we see. Now, it's very difficult to kind of, distinguish between capacitating social spending and compensating social protection, because a buffer is also something that releases a lot of stress. So if you're on an active labor market policy, but you don't have sort of, money at the end of the month, you're not sure what job you're going to get. So these buffers actually are extremely important also in terms of subjective well-being. So it's difficult to disentangle. But of course, we want to know whether parental leave, childcare increases female participation and maybe even fertility, whether pensions improve longevity, but what about fiscal sustainability? So and politically want to understand under which conditions governments are triggered to take, say, social investment seriously, because many do, but more don't. Anyway, so it's a very complex exercise. I mean, that's the thing I want to convey here. Next slide, please. And then in the background, and of course, you looking at skills, you have been exposed to this. There are, new statistical methods that basically model policies as, this is one intervention which is very concrete in terms of time, and there's a real difference between what happened before, and then later you say you can look up what the effect is. I mean, banning smoking from bars is an ideal way of looking at these sort of using fancy statistics. But the problem here is that what works in California may not work in Delaware or the other way around. And I find these methodologies, there's little theoretical reflection before the measurement operationalization. So maybe I'm old-fashioned, so I think our empirical indicators should be guided by theories and substantive knowledge, and we should discuss them. Whether stock flows and buffers. I mean, there's a big discussion about that that I'm part of. And then we should look at, and what numbers are relevant in order to make a causal inference, and the complexity of the welfare state should really be recognized, because it's a configurational policy mix. It's not just one policy that and that makes these sort of, statistical, the credibility revolution is a bit unhelpful in this context, in my view. Next slide, please. So this comes back to the way we sort of think about this. We have a theoretically anchored on the literature, on empirical evidence, working hypothesis. That's the life course multiplier. We use stock flows and buffers to kind of find out also at the micro level if there are synergies effects, complementarity effects between EC and ALMP, and we find that all kinds of complementarities, policies being in place at the same time, policies building on one another over time, and policy packages that affect different subpopulation target groups differently with respect to different groups. And what we also show more qualitatively, how policy configurations in different countries change over time. So if there is a major shift in, let's say, leave policies and childcare policies, as in Germany in the early 2000s, then by the 2020s, you know that a particular group that has been exposed to this intervention should show effects at the micro level if you have good panel data, and this is what we have, and this is what we do. Again, coming back to what I said before, a sine qua non is that welfare states are not simple distributive regimes. They are policy configurations that sort of hang together in a particular ways, and they change over time also because problems change over time, and then policymakers have to adapt the policy repertoires, and sometimes this creates fights, etc., etc. But I think that is a reality that we cannot really run away from. I think this was my last slide. Maybe not. I don't know. Yeah. So now I finished this project, and there's a book under the title "Returns to Social Investment" that I'm wrapping up right now. And for the next 4 years, I'm gonna look more at demographic change. So the intensification of aging in Europe, together with this disruptive technological revolution that we experience, and what that does intergenerational fairness and the welfare state. And uh, I'm I'm hopeful that the social investment idea will survive. These intensifying vulnerabilities, because that's what they are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anton. Thanks a lot. It was really impressive. Um, I would leave the floor to Begenk to kick off the discussion. And I see already some questions and comments in the chat. So I ask Begenk to start with the moderation, and then I invite all participants to ask for the floor and take the opportunity of having Professor Emerick with us. So, Begenk, over to you.
Yep. Thank you so much, Christiana. And also thank you for Professor Hemerick. I'm just checking the chat first before we start. I think I can invite Romain. Could you turn on the mic and ask your own question, please?
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Hello.
So thank you very much for this presentation. Fascinating, really. I'm gonna buy the book. Can I be on the pre-order list, please?
It's no, I think you get it with Amazon right now with Oxford. No, actually, no, it's open access. So you just download it from Oxford.
Okay, great.
So
So as you were speaking, a number of questions came up in my mind that they're probably very basic to you, and I'm sure you've covered them right at the design phase. So I was just curious, like you showed this curve where there is on one side investment, social investment, and the other axis is competitive index.
yeah, yeah.
So how do you know that this is not just a correlation and it's actually causality?
Yeah, so no. I mean, this is the troubling question, of course. So basically, we start. So the way I think, or the way we think, is we start with a number of correlations, right? So basically at the macro level, which kind of associate there's something to social investment being good for competitive, but we don't know exactly what it is, right? And then we say, well, maybe, it is a cumulative effect, right? So it's education at early stage, and then,
Mm,
high levels of entry level productivity. So we then sort of carve up the world in different age cohorts and see whether, these correlations continue to hold, right? I mean, that is sort of, and then we say, yeah, there's an effect at the population level.
mm,
And then we reason, well, but then you should also see this with micro level data, right? So this becomes
mm,
more causal and say, okay, so these are the social investment oriented welfare state. They do a lot of EC and ALMP. Is it the case that you can show at the micro level that the opportunities of entering the labor market or having a job, being productive, and having also good poverty protection, is that there? So that's why I use the term cumulative causal adequacy. We're using different methodologies to kind of tease out
mm,
whether, this working hypothesis holds over time, and then it's basically up to the reader, that's you, to say, yeah, I think this is plausible. And if
okay.
you go down to the sort of country level, you see that, countries like, France and sometimes Italy, they're stuck in a pension reform, and in a way that they cannot really free up space to invest more in families and children, or because there's a political. So in the end, you get a sense of this makes sense, right? That's what I'm.
Okay.
So in this
Okay.
causality revolution, it's sort of all you need to have sort of almost experimental data in order
Mm,
to show a tiny point, and I want to show a bigger point, and of course that bigger point cannot be sort of like proof in a really sort of with a
Mm.
B. So I opt for a very rich notion of plausibility. I mean, and then
Okay.
it's up to policymakers to think,
Mm.
maybe we should do something about this, yes or no.
Thanks a lot. Very clear. And I was also curious to, I mean, I understand you focused on EU member states, probably for
Yeah.
reasons of funding. Did you, out of curiosity, throw in some mid and high income countries from outside of EU to see if that how that fits?
Yeah, I mean, no, this is a European project.
Right.
But um, I mean, recently I've worked with a team of researchers in Turkey, and they did a really good paper on how Turkey fits in terms of social investment, stock flows, and buffers over time in a much broader comparison. And here you get a sense, and this is something that I would like to sort of do more on, and I know that the OECD is also quite interested. I mean, what you see very clearly is that, countries in Southeast Asia, which actually are a little bit ahead of the sort of, the demographic crisis, such as South Korea, Taiwan, and
Mm.
Japan. I mean, they're also taking social investment seriously at the policy level. But here you see also the kind of, cultural factors that hold social investment back,
Mm.
because the labor market, which is the private labor markets, are very much sort of male breadwinner oriented. So you have all these
Mm.
policies that should allow more women to participate, and they do, but they decide not to have children because the work-life balance is not organized well at the company level.
Mm.
So there is a general tendency, and you also see this in China, but in China you see this more at the level of cities. So there's a general tendency, and I was really surprised when I presented also this work in Ankara, how policymakers from the Ministry of Social Affairs sort of like started to take this seriously, because the aging
Mm.
crisis will happen also in Turkey, but probably much later, and sort of the willingness to prepare for this in a social investment kind orientation was really striking, because when I was first invited, I thought, I don't know whether social investment works for
Mm.
Turkey, yes,
Mm.
no, but I think, and I've never tried to develop sort of a way of a general theory of social investment, because I think it would be, yeah, it's too much work
Mm.
in a way that I cannot do myself. But the echo on this way of thinking from outside of Europe is actually, yeah, it's surprisingly strong, I would say.
Mm. Okay. Thank you. And then one last one, and then I'll leave the floor, Big Ank, I promise. One thing that really important to us at ETF is the cultural dimension, the anthropological
Yeah,
consideration, because we work throughout regions with very different
yeah,
cultures.
yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah,
And I wonder whether that you manage to consider that. I mean, even across EU, that there's many differences. I mean, the South, old people are likely to stay with their children throughout their old age, whereas in the
yeah,
North, it's less so. If you
yeah,
leave Europe, it's even more so. I mean, in the Arab countries.
yeah, yeah,
So would that the traditional social protection
yeah.
perspective, was that considered?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I supervise a lot of students who have sort of anthropological angles to their
Mm.
research. But for this research, this is difficult to integrate. And what I mean, the book that we come out will come out next year, but it's not anthropological, but it is really about cities, and it's
Mm.
about and so if you take, I mean, I'm making an exaggeration now, but if you take the childcare work-life balance execution, and the best place in Europe, surprisingly, and I'm making an exaggeration, is Bologna. And they have a long tradition, and it's supported by employers, by the trade unions, by the city council, and you really see this island of excellence in a sea of relative ignorance. And given the fact that as I said, that this type of welfare state is more service intensive, you and looking only at macro indicators and looking only at national legislative fights over one policy or the other is not really insightful, because I mean services have to be applied locally. Sometimes they don't show up in the statistics because
Right.
civil society organizations who are part of this configuration at the local level, and this sort of makes me also again humble for the generalizability of the story. So basically, the next layer is going to add richer detail to the social investment way of thinking. And this was also, I mean, I visited China a couple of times, that you think China and social investment has nothing to do with one another. Well, the same demographic pressures, the same family transitions are really very strong in these big cities, and probably the same applies to Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro. So yeah,
Okay.
and so we have to look more at cities, I think. Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you very much. Fascinating.
thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Maybe I can invite Christina. Could you read out loud the question? Yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Berenke, and thank you again, Professor Emerick, for such insights. As in ETF and also within this network, we are trying to connect a lot with the policy level work in the countries we work with, and the discourse which came out very often is the difficulty in shifting from these let's say, preventive, these reactive systems, welfare systems, to proactive. So sometimes governments most of the time need to work on the emergency, so they are reactive to a problem, and it's they really cannot afford to be preventive. So, based on your experience and the findings from this project, how do you think that governments could balance these two? And also another question that maybe it's linked to this, in your view, I mean, what would be the recommendations? If you had to prioritize one reform that delivers the highest well-being return, I mean, top
Yeah.
recommendations for policymakers. I mean, if you feel that the project can provide recommendations for policymakers. Thank you.
And it's a very good question. I mean, the best policy for the greatest return is investing in children, right? That is, but politically, I mean, by the time you reap the benefits of higher levels of productivity of children born, today, we're talking about 20 years, right? At least. So politically, if you want to win the next election, and children cannot vote, and pensioners do vote, raising pension benefits is a politically a much easier bargain. And I think this is something that we need to kind of preempt, this kind of short-termist response of many policymakers and politicians, although I understand the pressure that they are under. So the discussion with them is, if you want to save pensions, and of course you do, you need to prepare something today in order to sustain the pension system overall. And think about, you know, the commitments to education, and these policies that do not cost a lot in terms of productive investment, and this includes healthcare, I would say. I think that's the conversation you need to be having. Now, that conversation is extremely difficult to have because, I mean, one of the things that what we see in our book, and these are 10 European countries, and you know, except for Latvia and Poland, these are all advanced welfare states. And you see that they do social investment. They raise the pension age. They use more carrots than sticks in order to persuade people, and leave policies. They all do. But they don't, they change the policy portfolio, but it's not with conviction, right? They have to do it because, you know, they promise something during the elections, and it's good to recalibrate, you know, the social contract a little bit, but don't talk about it. And this is very irritating because some countries do relatively well and they do not take credit for it. They do not take credit. Look, you know, when I came into politics, I promised not to raise, not to lower pension benefits. And yes, I've been successful. But the reason I was successful is that I've tried to have more women participate in the labor market in a way that balances, you know, gender and work-life balance. So I've actually learned something by keeping to my promise to do something else. And for a long-term perspective, we need to think in these terms more. And so I was really, really struck that social investment is happening everywhere, maybe too little, too late, or whatever you want to sort of, you know, you can have qualifiers, is the glass half full or half empty. But the political reluctance to do this is really staggering. And it probably has to do with the fact that, you know, deep down in the policymakers' mind, but also in the public at large, there is this idea that, you know, too much social protection, you know, eats into competitiveness, but there are all these kind of, and these ideas that came from, you know, the liberal days of the neoliberal days of the 1980s have been with us for 30 years. So we're all kind of primed to that idea. But I was really struck by the reluctance. I mean, I'm happy. I mean, I'm optimistic because it's happening, but I'm a bit pessimistic when it comes to who's taking pride of this. And this is something, again, coming back to cities. Cities take pride in social investment, take pride in social services. Now, they have an easy life in a way because they don't have to take care of pensions, which national governments have to do, right? So, but at least there is pride taking at the city level, and sometimes, you know, these mayors, as in the UK today, then run for to become prime minister, and hopefully they bring some of their work also to this debate. But the reluctance is very strong, and then of course the EU is a cheerleader of social investment on the ideational side, but you know, the Commission has an easy life. It's not. It doesn't have this shadow of the next election, which could be tomorrow, right? Because there's so much polarization right now. So yeah, politically they have an easy life, and then it's easy also to commit to social investment.
Yeah, thank you so much. Participants, dear participants, if you have any questions, please you can join because we still have. I think we can extend the conversation. If there is no question, I can ask one question because we have webinars, ETF webinars, but we rarely have an economist in our webinar. So could you describe like education and skill development as a social investment? And in the short term is an employability, but in the long run, what are the impact of that education and skill development in society? and how the government can benefit. And also the statistics, like you mostly benefit from OECD and EU statistics, but also you work with 10 different countries in the EU. So how, and then from my observation, there are some countries that collect much more reliable and useful data than the OECD, because OECD is, to make it comparable, they narrowing some of the. Maybe you can share some of the country cases that are doing really well that we can just target and follow and learn from.
I think you always need to be careful, sort of to pick and choose, right? So Denmark is doing much better than Sweden today, so we all go for Denmark. Although 10 years ago it was Sweden, and in the 1990s it was the Netherlands, and then so I think social investment should be highly. I mean, when you think about social investment, I think the logic everybody by now kind of understands, but it means different things to different countries. If you look at, I mean, the OECD, so I was looking at OECD data on, I can't remember. I think it's early childhood education and care, and all of a sudden Germany scored really well. And I was really surprised. And I got in touch with the OECD and I said, look, I'm using your data, but I can't believe it, that it's. And then they said to me, well, the problem with Germany is that, education and early childhood education and care as part of it, is lender based. So there are these sub-national units that run the education system. And we couldn't create an average. So we basically took Berlin. Now, Berlin has the most progressive early childhood education policy. And in the surrounding of Berlin, the take-up rate of childcare is very high in Eastern Europe because it was already high in the communist era. And then there is legislation that says, every kid has a right to a childcare place. Yeah, they have a right, but if there is no capacity, in the outskirts of Munich, then it simply doesn't happen. So the point that I want to make is that it's, on the one hand, it's a different way of thinking, and also a different way of thinking about the economy, because if we say we're a knowledge economy, and then skills are extremely important, and how skills are being embedded and also facilitated across the life course. I mean, it doesn't stop with education, right? It has to go on. Those are policies that require interventions, and some countries are very good at vocational training and education, such as Germany, but it's very industry based, and the industry in Germany being very much, aligned to the combustion engine. Maybe there are doubts about it. And some countries like Sweden, they put much more effort in general education. Now, with the AI revolution, we don't know. Do we need better vocational training and education? Then Germany has a competitive advantage. If, AI is such a general technological tool, it's much better to have good general education. But I mean, there's so many experts and economists talking about these in different ways that I wouldn't bet on any one of them. It's always very important to think about what are the vulnerabilities to the economy, and in Germany probably it's the car industry, and what are the sort of historical strengths of the economy, and that is vocational training. And then can you persuade the trade unions and employers organization to open up the vocational training system, which is qua organization quite good, into sort of training more general skills that are transversal across sectors rather than being tied to one particular sector. If you see what I mean, rather than sort of jumping to the conclusion we have to all become Danish, because we are not Danish.
Yeah, thank you for your very in-depth, the answer. And also maybe this thing you can include in your next project because that also covers the technological change. That's the title itself.
Yeah. No, we are doing.
Yeah, we have a last, maybe this will be the last question. If I ask Elona, could you join and ask your question or
Yes,
you?
thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you very much, Professor, for the insightful presentation. Very interesting. Because of my background, I come from Albania, and we are very much affected by migration, especially outgoing migration. So I was thinking in terms of also influencing policy making and policymakers to advance social investment. So how do you see these issues of international migration? How could the welfare states adopt their social investment policies that they benefit from the opportunities, but also address challenges that come with international migration? Just to provide a very brief example, we have this issue of students of medicine that usually graduate and leave to Germany. So the parliament passed a law in order to inhibit them to move for the first 3 years when they graduate. But of course, it's not a long-term solution. So I was just thinking along these lines. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, this is really a tough question. I mean, clearly, what we see, especially in the European context, and this applies to Albania, is that there is a lot of outward migration. I mean, also from Kosovo and other places, and also from the south of Italy. So this is a difficult nut to crack. I mean, I'm sympathetic to the policy that you alluded to. That, and I think we also have to. I'm not. No, I shouldn't say we also have this in the Netherlands, but I've heard a lot about. So governments invest in doctors, and of course, in the European context, freedom of movement is important. But you can put a lid on that, right? So you can say, well, you first have to work for a couple of years in the national health system before you are allowed to migrate, and because I mean what we see now happening a lot. I mean this is a consequence of aging, is that there are massive labor market shortages. And my hunch would be that this would raise salaries. I mean, for a very long time, over the past 30 years, it's the profits were bigger than the labor income, and I think that the tables are turning now. Of course, that those who say AI is going to destroy all that, again, but I'm not so sure, because I mean your example is a good one, because I mean, it's the care sector that is very difficult to automate, I'm now in a bit of a working group with Enrico Letta, who in his report on the single market had this relatively vague concept on the freedom to stay, whatever that means, but clearly it's the highly educated are very mobile, and then there are groups that are being left behind or stay behind for good reasons, but they're not supported by a growing economy. So I find this really difficult. I mean, my thinking about Albania is that it should become a member of the EU, I mean, sooner than later, because that would, and you already see this in the tourist sector, this is going to be a booming economy. And once it booms, then people may return, and even doctors may return. And I think I think this has to be taken very seriously. Sorry for not a clear answer.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for your participation and active also participation in Q&A session. This is close to an end. I'm giving the floor to Christina now to wrap up the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Begenke. Thank you, Professor Emerick, for being with us today, for these brilliant insights. Of course, sure, we will go and look for the publication, because that will be definitely super helpful and interesting for us to to complete it in more detail. I would like to also encourage the participants to continue the discussion of today also through our LinkedIn group. So to share the findings and the perspectives from each of you on the insights that we received today. From our side, we are going to share the materials, the presentation and the summary with the key takeaways in the ETF Open Space, I think in the next few days, and we'll send you the link to the page in Open Space. We will also add a brief satisfaction poll survey on the session, and I kindly ask you to take a few minutes to fill it in, as your feedback will help us improving our activities. So we are ready to close for today. I thank you once again, you all, for being with us. I wish you a great summer ahead, and we will reconvene our online activities of the network in September with a very dense program. Thank you again for being with us today, and a big thanks to Professor Emerick for the time dedicated to this session, and we for sure will be in contact for maybe follow-up discussions, because it was really enriching. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you.